Joining us now, Jay Sekulow. He's the chief counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, also counselor to the president. Jay, I have yet to get your reaction to Rod Rosenstein and holding this press conference and the indictment of 13 Russians and his comments in particular about these Russian trolls. One thing we didn't get out of the press conference is anything involving collusion of anybody with Russia, just the opposite. He talked about any American being unwittingly used.
Well, that's a key phrase, and it's used twice in the indictment itself. So, I think that Bob Mueller's team had to dig deep, and they did, to figure this out. This is not stuff you just find out just by doing a Google search. So they were able to determine this. They determined that the 13 Russians, as well as these three entities, were engaged in this kind of what they basically I don't know if you call it lawfare, whatever they were engaged in. It was information warfare is what it was phrased in the indictment. But I think there's a couple of takeaways here. One, the Russians were trying to do something. That doesn't, by the way, there's no allegation of the Russian government. But again, these were people based in Russia. It's hard to believe that the Russian government wouldn't have known something was going on. So that's one thing. Number two, and this is significant, the absence of the word, of course, is not a crime anyways, which is the word collusion. There's no, in fact, Rod in his statement went out of his way to say that there was no American who was wittingly involved. He said no American citizens were wittingly involved in this situation, which means that no American was aware that they were dealing with Russians or Russian operatives in some kind of sinister motive. And then, no one involved with the Trump campaign or the Trump organization was involved in this as well. So, in that sense, I think it was good for the American people that we found out that individuals in Russia were up to ill intent, that we've determined who it is, that they're taking it seriously, and that I think it goes well for the president in the sense that there is no evidence in this indictment of any kind of.
There were two charges, though, that Rod Rosenstein gave the special counsel. One was to find out if there's any outside influence, and the other was collusion, correct?
Right.
Okay, so it would be perfectly, I guess, normal or natural that he deals with one aspect at one time and the other aspect at another time. But as you read the actual indictment and you read the words, no American, at all wittingly knew what was going on here, that they went through major efforts to deceive and major efforts at deception of the American people. Yeah, I mean,
supposedly Michael Moore went to one of these rallies. So, again, the significance of the word wittingly, though, is that for there to be a crime, there's a level of intent that's necessary. So if you're unwittingly, if then you were not wittingly involved, that means you did not have the intent to do something that would be a violation of the law or would constitute a crime. So in that sense, I think this was exactly what the charge was. And I think you saw the work of about 9 months of investigating to come up with this. Now, the truth is probably none of these individuals will ever be brought to justice, but it sent a message to other countries that to be careful when you're messing with the American system.
But it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that Russia is wanting to insert itself and create chaos and sow discord in this country. I mean, and the reason is, and one of the issues that I have been following now for a long time that I think it's going to get bigger and bigger, because it was just in the last couple of weeks that this guy, Mr. Campbell, who was the FBI informant that knew all of Russia's efforts as it relates to the Uranium One deal, he was talking about Putin operatives in America involved in crimes like bribery, extortion, money laundering, kickbacks. We were just talking about that with Sarah Carter and Victoria Tunsing. So that's back in 2009. Sadly, we didn't pay attention to what the informant was telling us. And similarly, if we're really concerned about collusion or influence of the Russians in this past election in 2016, don't we have to fully focus on one candidate and a bought and paid for Russian dossier full of Russian lies and even Russian government lies?
There you're talking about, of course, the Steele dossier, which leads us to what Devin Nunes has done now, which is issue a 10-question questionnaire to upwards of 24 former Obama administration officials and some current officials within the government, asking them very detailed information, including was President Obama briefed on any information contained in the dossier prior to January 5th, 2017? What official actions did you take as a result of receiving the information contained in the dossier? And we know that the result of that dossier became a FISA warrant, and that is a huge story.
Well, let me ask you, if you read the indictment, and I think this is a really important point. We have a foreign national by the name of Christopher Steele. As far as I know, he didn't record any of the monies and donations in kind that he was given the Hillary campaign. I don't know if he registered for FARC. I doubt he did that as well. I've not seen any indication that he did. Then you got Fusion GPS that's hiring him. They're coordinating, apparently, even with the Hillary campaign, which particular media outlets they are all going to be leaking this information to, which in fact we know happened as these entities were leaked to. And my question is, if you apply the same standard to the Russians in this case, what about other foreign nationals? Does it matter if you're from Great Britain or does it matter if you're from Russia?
No, and Senators Grassley and Senator Graham have said that in a criminal referral letter that they gave over to the Department of Justice on Christopher Steele, who, by the way, was negotiating this or working on this with the wife of Bruce Orr, who was the number 4 at the Justice Department. They were still meeting after Christopher Steele was terminated because he leaked information to the press. But they still utilize that for a FISA warrant, which is a huge move, and we've talked about that a lot. And let me take it a step further, and this is the thing I think people are not connecting. You have a situation where the president-elect of the United States is briefed the day after the famous Susan Rice memo meeting, which is the meeting is the 5th of January. She writes the memo on January 20th to cover your tracks memo. And then you have the next day the president-elect briefed by then James Comey, who tells the president-elect about this dossier, says it's salacious and unverified. What a lie. Now, not that it was certainly salacious and unverified, but what a lie to say, don't worry about this thing, we're not doing anything with it, which is what he said, when, in fact, they already relied on it to get a FISA warrant, and they were relying on it right away to get a
wait a minute. So if he's telling the president-elect in January, before he's sworn in, that it's salacious and unverified, didn't he know?
Right.
Then he had to know back in October when they were going before a FISA judge with their application. Yeah. Okay. So that means that, well, my interpretation, I'll use my words, you use yours, but they lied to a FISA judge. They purposely omitted key bits of information so that they can get this warrant to spy on an opposition party candidate and members of his campaign or campaign associates in the case of Carter Page. So what I'm asking is,
I think the FISA court should, if they can do it on their own motion, it's difficult. They can do it. They can release the information on the FISA warrant, but you got to make sure sources and methods obviously are protected. But this has raised a very significant situation, a very significant matter for the American people. And that is, and this is what becomes critical on this, that FISA warrant was utilized. They got the FISA warrant. Remember, it failed the first couple of times, so they get it the third time because of the Steele dossier. They use as to evidence to back up the Steele dossier. They use the Isikoff report, which is nothing but a report on the Steele dossier. So that's circular reasoning. Then they have a meeting on January 5th where they all get together and they're deciding what they're going to tell the president-elect. James Comey goes up there the next day, says, well, we've got this dossier. We're not, you're not under investigation. We're not taking action on it. It's salacious and unverified. Those are James Comey's words. Yet 3 months before that, he went and signed off on a FISA warrant using that same salacious and unverified dossier.
Doesn't it matter now what was discussed in that January 5th meeting if they all agreed and, the president weighed in? And doesn't this put a lot of emphasis now on what Susan Rice was writing in her note to self on January 20th about that January 5th meeting?
The note to self was 2.5 weeks after the meeting. So you got to ask yourself, why was she writing that memo? And that memo was to cover your tracks. In
other words, it's likely
leak the meetings. Someone was going to leak it. Somebody knew about it. There was someone there that she was concerned about, or saw somebody go into this. People saw them go into this meeting. So who knows? It could be a host of reasons. But something's not right, obviously.
We'll take a break. We're in Washington. Jay Sekulow with us, Chief Counsel, American Center for Law and Justice, and also the Counsel for the President was with us. As we continue, Jay Sekulow is with the American Center for Law and Justice, Chief Counsel to the President. We've talked a lot about what should happen here and that we really need a general counsel, somebody objective or a special counsel to get involved here and look into all of this as it relates to everything, Jay. We've got high-ranking members in the DOJ, in the FBI that clearly have not been honest and truthful, that clearly have had agendas. To me, it's the biggest abuse of power case I've ever seen in my life. And the American people now have gone through over a year of all of this nonsense because these people have wanted this. Your thoughts?
I think I've been calling for a special counsel since all of this took place. The way it's been handled, the way the interplay between senior Department of Justice employees and these outside groups, and how all of that fit together. And I think because you've got senior members of the Justice Department, they're still there, by the way. So they've been moved to different departments or different divisions, but they're all still there. The fact is that I think what you have to do is this is when you need a special counsel. It's not Bob Mueller's job. It's not in his mandate. But someone to come in and investigate this and make a determination. Now, we're also waiting for an Inspector General's report. And that report, they say, is due, any day now, probably towards the end of the month. And that could be a big matter. That could be a big issue. And depending what's in there, if it is in fact significant, then I think that, again, that doesn't mean you don't need a special counsel. There's only limited things the Inspector General can do. So I think a special counsel here would be appropriate.
All right, Jay Sekulow, we really appreciate it.
Thanks,
you have any more comments, new charges being brought against Manafort and Gates, and apparently were sealed?
So this is not unusual that there would be what's called a superseding indictment. So I think that's not an unusual situation. What it'll be in it, I guess they'll disclose. They'll find out, and their lawyers will know. But no, I'm not surprised that happened. That's not atypical in these situations.
One thing that always seems to happen with these special counsels is they're given an original mandate and they move way beyond what that mandate ever was. I think that happened with Patrick Fitzgerald and the whole Scooter Libby issue that came up in that case. That was 3.5 years later. I mean, is this going to be a 3.5-year ordeal? Is there an end in sight to all of this? And last question, would that include the dossier now? Does that come under the review of the special counsel, and does the issue of Uranium One come under the review?
I don't think the dossier or the Uranium One situation would come under the mandate of Bob Mueller's. I think that what you're seeing, and again, no one knows this except the special counsel himself and his team. I think this is moving towards closure. You've got new indictments today on the Gates Manafort matter, unrelated to the campaign, no involvement with the president-elect. Or the campaigns. It had nothing to do with that. It was on business matters well before the president was even a candidate. And then you've had these subsequent pleas coming in for perjury, false statements, 1001 violations as they're called. And you had the indictment come down on the Russia engagement in the election. So I think it's coming. I think it's coming near a closure. Having said that, I'm never one that puts time on what that time is. So the special counsel is the only one that knows that.
Jay Sekulow, thanks for being with us.